Another edition of No Stoplights. Thank you for joining us. I want to clear the air to begin with. This is not clutter. This is product placement. If you're in the world of media and entertainment, you understand that none of this is possible without sponsors. And Pepsi and McLeod and Victor's and Francis Marion University. This is not clutter, my friends. This is product placement, very strategically placed to make sure our sponsors know how much we genuinely appreciate their support of this podcast. Has kind of gained a little traction. And I mean, for those of you who know and don't know, I do 20 hours a week of conservative red meat talk radio. It's a lot of fun. It's therapeutic. It's cathartic. It's one-sided. It's biased. It's unapologetic. I don't make any apologies for how I see the world, but we do give a phone number. This is different. I wanted to make an investment in our community, and I went out and visited these sponsors and said, hey, this is not an extension of radio, but rather a chance or an opportunity to engage our community where they are, tell some stories that people may not know, find some personalities and businesses to accentuate and highlight, pay respect and tribute to. And I think we're doing that. I mean, it's a slow grind. For those of you who don't want to know how this works, like and subscribe. I'm not the tech guy. Dave Baker's the tech guy that handles all the producing and editing, but he says, hey, man, you don't tell people to subscribe and like enough. So subscribe and like. We've got a YouTube channel. We've got a Facebook page on the way. But I want to make sure you know, as viewers and listeners, this ain't clutter. I mean, these are sponsors that we're unbelievably appreciative of. Speaking of sponsors, here's our list. And I want to redundantly thank them for their kind and generous support. Francis Marion University, Carolina Bank, Micky Finn's. Maybe we get a bottle of Jefferson's Ocean to sit up here and have a Jefferson-style dinner one of these days. Victor's, our good friend Tim Norwood, who has been a guest on this podcast. MPD Electric Co-op, one of the great ambassadors of economic development, not just in our community, but in our area. McCall Farms, Henry and Marion Swink were with us. Pepsi of Florence. I'm working with Les Ward as we speak to find someone who can give a detailed history of Pepsi. Pepsi's Carolina-born, Carolina-bred. They're a little bit exclusive of the national brand Pepsi, but Les is helping me run down someone who can come on the podcast and give a kind of a history and an accounting of Pepsi of Florence and its relationship with our podcast audience. PLC Commercial Real Estate. And our most recent podcast, we talked a little bit about employment recruiting with McLeod Health, the largest employer in our county. So we're very proud and honored to have these sponsors on board. And now I'm flipping because I want to introduce our next guest. And a lot of you say, well, how do you decide? I don't really know. I mean, I have this busy head. It's a disease, it's a curse and a blessing all at the same time. But I think about people who I believe you'd have an interest in what they say, what they believe, where they come from. My next guest texted me today and said, hey, what is the material? What are the talking points? I said, the life and times of. He said, well, I'll bore you to death. No, he won't. I'll assure you of that. We'll call this one, you ready? The podcast is titled The Life and Times of Stephen Wukela. And I want to welcome our former mayor and a good friend of mine, Stephen Wukela, to our podcast studio. I
appreciate it.
How are you, sir?
Very good. I'm glad that the bourbon and this Victor's cups are sponsored by Micky Finn's, right?
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, yeah, Micky Finn's helps us with the Garnet Trust podcast. And then, and I've actually got Rick scheduled to appear, sooner than later. Stephen, you're Florentine.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm a Pamplicoenian, but we grew up in the same neighborhood. The majority of people believe we're about to discuss politics, and we'll get to that in due time. But tell me who Stephen Wukela is, where he comes from, a little bit about your childhood and upbringing, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I am a Florentinian in the sense that I was born in Florence, but I suspect that I was narrowly born here, right? And a lot of Florentinians may say I don't qualify, because when I was born in 1975 in Florence at the old McLeod Infirmary, most of people in this area had kind of been here for generations, But my father and mother showed up here in Florence about a month or two before I was born. My father's from Mansfield, Ohio. and the old Rust Belt, and the place that's gotten hard hit over the last few generations. And he was a Midwesterner. Family had come from Croatia at the beginning of World War I. And there were a lot of Eastern Europeans in Ohio, and that's where he grew up. And he got invited to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, by the United States Army when he finished Ohio State in 1968. And the war was escalating. Tet Offensive had just happened. And so he was on his way to Vietnam. And when he came down to South Carolina, he ended up being commissioned as an Army officer and spent some time at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia, where he met a little country girl from Thompson, Georgia, which is a farm community about half an hour to the west of Augusta. My mother grew up on a farm there in Thompson, and she was teaching in Augusta, and she met my father there, and they ended up getting married, and he ended up getting out of the Army and going to law school, and just on the whim, he answered a job offer for in a place called Florence, South Carolina that he'd never been to and didn't really expect to stay long, and came, and of course, here we are 50 years later, and she was pregnant with me when they showed up. It was a little bit, growing up in Florence, having a last name with a vowel on the end of it, and not being here from 3 generations back made you a different kind of commodity.
So he integrated himself, or your family integrated themselves in the community. In what way? I mean, he's a lawyer. Yeah. Did he initially start a law firm, or did he go to work in a law practice?
Well, he came to work for another lawyer, a guy by the name of Rogers Curvin. And Rogers had the distinction of being just about the only Republican in town. And, of course, my dad, even then, was a diehard liberal Midwestern Democrat. And Rogers got in some trouble, ended up getting suspended. My dad hadn't been there long, and Rogers got suspended, and he looked around and said, I believe I can run this firm. And so there were, I think, 4 or 5 secretaries there at the time, and my dad just never looked back. And he did a little office right there on Evans Street. John Curvin, Rogers' son, practiced there later. And he just kept going. And never did any advertising, and as we never have in 50 years. He and I are both adamantly opposed to that, and he said, if you can't get a client because another client thought you did a good job, then you don't deserve a client. And so he built a practice and got bigger and bigger, and ended up buying some space down on Second Loop Road. And at the time, in the late 70s and early 80s, other lawyers said, man, you might as well go into Lake City. That you're out of town. But of course, Florence has grown, and so his practice grew, and we became part of the community. Florence has that way. I think a lot of people come to Florence not expecting to stay long, and then turn around and they've been here for 30, 50 more years.
So let's delve into that, if you don't mind, and tell us as much as you're comfortable with. And my intent is to disarm you and to get you to talk candidly about some things that people probably don't know about yourself. And I've quoted this a lot, and I think it's very appropriate. Springsteen on Broadway. Yeah. Bruce says during that his father was his idol, and that ghost had haunted every day of his life. Yeah. I worked for my dad. I know the complications. It is the best of world. It is the worst of times. Yeah. But Stephen, speak about your father's influence, not just on your life as a lawyer and business partner, but developing as a young man, and some of the things you believed in and trusted in, and some of the political opinions that you formed.
I listened to Gray on the show the last time, and Gray talking about his dad. And a lot of that echoed with me, as I know your relationship with your father. He is a tough SOB, and grew up hard. My dad was the first in his family to have a driver's license. I mean, he's the first in his family to finish grade school. First in his family certainly to go to law school or anything like that. He came from nothing. And he came here into a place where nobody knew him, and he was an outsider, and he built a life. and he treated everybody he ever dealt with honestly. He worked hard for his clients. My wife jokes that we've reached a point in our life where maybe we have gained some wealth, but we identify as poor. And my dad sure identified as poor, still does. And he believed in working people. I mean, that's where he came from. He came from the Midwest, factory families, and he believed in hard work. And also he had the military background. And so, boy, let me tell you what, growing up, it was like growing up in the barracks, off and on, off your ass and on your feet, son. And we worked hard. And that, has distilled through my life.
Let's go to this. At what point in time did you realize your father, and I respect the hell out of this, and I mean it sincerely, I believe what I believe and I'm very passionate about it. I don't believe the same thing your father believes. Yeah. He doesn't believe the same thing I believe, but I've always respected and admired the fact that he does passionately believe in what he believes in. When did those conversations begin?
I mean, from the beginning. We always ate dinner together. I've got two brothers, and we always ate dinner together around dinner table. He'd come home from work. We'd have a full spread. My mom, grew up on the farm and is a great Southern lady, Southern cook, and we had this dichotomy, right? My dad jokes that in his town, in the town square, they had a statue of Grant. In my mom's town, the town square, they had a statue of Robert E. Lee. And so we always kind of grew up with that dichotomy. And we'd have dinner discussions, and he would argue with you. I mean, affirmatively.
Enjoyed it.
Oh, man.
Provoked it.
It was sparring. And then you'd realize about halfway through the dinner that he had changed positions completely and was arguing the other side. And just as an exercise is kind of challenging your thought on something. And so the worst thing you could do was agree with him, because then he was going to take the opposite position and challenge where you got that concept from. And it was kind of the idea that no idea was sacrosanct. There wasn't anything that was beyond examining and debating. And why do you believe that? You justify your view on that. There wasn't any view that was wrong, only if you hadn't thought it through and you couldn't defend it. And you weren't. He used to say, I'm not 100% convinced of anything, son. I want to challenge it and continue to challenge it. And so that kind of love of debate and thought and argument and willingness to voracious reading and damned hard work. I mean, the real Midwestern kind of economically based hard work and view of politics that had more to do with FDR and Truman than kind of the modern Democratic Party. Not to get too much into politics.
No. I mean, we're getting in the weeds here. We got plenty of time. We don't have a commercial break. I thank our sponsors, and I want to get there. So you and I really enjoy talking about the dynamic of our and our father's relationship. I love to talk about it. I think I respect my father, and I pay tribute to my dad when I talk about the impact. But I can't forget Mama.
Oh, man.
I mean, Mama was always my biggest advocate, my biggest fan. My dad would be my fan and my critic all at the same time. Talk a little bit about your mom. The majority of people who are interested in you and your story know some of the dynamic between you and your dad.
Yeah.
Your mom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she grew up on a small farm in Georgia. She lost her dad very early in life, and her mother was a strong Southern woman who raised that family. Was church secretary, and it was a hard scrabble, tough life. She sewed our clothes, she made our dinners, she spanked our butts. She raised 3 boys and was tough. But she never, for a second, questioned her love, of course, and never saw them disagree in front of you. I mean, they not for a second. Goodness knows, I'm sure they did, but not in front of the boys. And they are a really good team. She was a mom who was home. You know, and
Did you recognize any distinction between the Midwest characteristics of your father and the Southern traits that your mom probably brought to the family?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, you know, there are those regional differences, and there's those differences in kind of tendency. You know, my dad was a kind of a radical from the beginning, right?
Enjoyed it.
He enjoyed it. He relished it. He's kind of, you know, his joke is this a private fight or can anybody join in? You know, and of course, you know, she is, you know, a Southern lady, you know, who is disarming with courtesy and wit, a little dry kind of wit. You know, she her mother was, you know, the epitome of that, and she used to joke, you know, she'd say, Stephen, you know, the doctor gave me this bottle of pills, and it says here to take one pill twice daily. Now you know you can't do that. You know, that kind of dry wit, sarcastic Southern, you know, that is disarming is the word. I mean, you used it earlier. It's an interesting thing because I learned it too in politics, that while kind of the Midwestern Northern approach is much more aggressive and in your face, in the South, you may disagree with someone, but you're not going to refuse them a courtesy. You're not going to refuse dinner with them. And you can build relationships in the South through courtesy and through relationships in a way that is much different, I think, than other parts of the state. I have a son who's overseas right now, and he's learning Chinese, and they say that he speaks, not only does he speak English, he speaks Southern, you know, and that's a different thing.
So did your father demand of you to have informed political opinions at an early age?
Oh, yeah.
No question about that.
No question about it.
So you go off to Clemson.
Yeah.
Do you carry that political spirit with you?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And, of course, Clemson is when I was deciding to go to school, it was NYU, George Washington, or Clemson. And you talk about three dramatically different places. And I ended up going to Clemson because, as you know, it is beautiful.
They say it is.
Oh, come on. Even you Gamecocks.
It is a very scenic campus.
Now, listen, and I have a son at USC.
It is a very scenic campus.
It's a beautiful place.
It is.
And I
Auburn's
fell in love
prettier,
with the
but
place.
it's
it's an incredibly conservative campus. Okay?
And you weren't a conservative.
And I was by far not a conservative. But the professors there were fantastic. And I got a very good education. I studied philosophy and political science, and you wouldn't think necessarily that you'd get a great education in philosophy at a place as conservative as Clemson, South Carolina, but boy, did I. And I met a great girl there. Did
you go to Clemson knowing that eventually you'd go to law school?
I don't know if I knew I was going to go to law school. I knew that that on the SAT I was doing better in verbal than I was in math. I can guarantee that. It wasn't going to be science or math. It was going to be a world of words. I thought for a while about going into academics. In fact, I had a philosophy professor that wrote a recommendation for law school for me that said to them that I was wasting my brain, that I should be a professional philosopher, and that I was wasting my brain by going to do a technical job like law, but that if I wanted to do that they should accept it.
So what pulled the trigger? What made you decide, okay, law school it is?
Well, and I had this argument with a great philosophy professor who was a mentor of mine, and I said that I want to see practical results. I very much enjoyed the world of ideas and sitting in the professor's office and debating Hegel or Kant and the world of logic and reason and argument. But at the end of the day, all we'd done was drink coffee. And I wanted to see result. And at its best, law allows that. We got some time, I'll tell you a story about my dad. When I first started practicing law, my dad told me two stories. One was about different kinds of lawyers. And he said, son, there are three types of trial lawyers. Okay? First type is trial lawyer that's got no business in the courtroom. They might be brilliant, they might be smart, they might be great lawyers, but they just don't belong in a courtroom where you have to think on your feet, and it's a fast-moving, aggressive. He told a story about a professor of his that was an evidence professor in law school that was brilliant, and he saw him argue in the Supreme Court, and he was horrible. That he didn't belong there. He belonged in academia. And he said, and some are like that. He said there's a second category of trial lawyers that they do the job without passion or prejudice. They grind it out. They're very good at it, and they go home, and that's that. And they retire when they can, and that's that. He said, and then there are the sickos. And the sickos are like junkies. And the first time they stand up in the courtroom and they say, my name's Steve Wukela, and I represent the plaintiff, and they convince a judge with something they had thought up in their brain, and they change that guy's life, and they have this rush of adrenaline, and they become addicted to it, and they want more of it. And that is the three types of lawyers. And he said, there's no way to know which one you are, but you will find out soon enough.
When did you find out?
First time I stood up in a courtroom.
It was obvious to you.
Hicks Harwell was the judge.
That would have been what year, Stephen?
2000.
Okay, 25 years ago-ish,
Yeah.
25-ish years ago.
And I convinced the judge, and it changed that guy's life. And I said, I want to do more of this. And
you knew that you were where you were supposed to be.
yes. And my father told me, too, that like every other junkie, what gave you that rush before doesn't give it to you. You get a tolerance. So it has to be a bigger case or a more important issue or a death penalty or can I change this community? Can I change this neighborhood? Can I change downtown? Can I change it? And that escalates.
But is it fair to say, because I've always wondered this about lawyers, I mean, advocacy is in your bones. Yeah. Whether you're advocating for a client, advocating for a political cause, advocating whatever it is. I mean, it's something that you feel. I mean, it's almost like you're always lawyering.
Yeah, I couldn't be a judge. I have to take a position.
Yeah, and I get that. And then the idea of neutrality doesn't turn me on much at all. So let's you have somewhat of a background in philosophy, law, deep thinking. You're inspired by some of the era of Enlightenment philosophers, and I'm talking about Hobbes and Locke and some of the others that really were part of the forming of our nation. If you go back and read Jefferson, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you could argue Jefferson plagiarized some of John Locke.
Well, he did. I mean, he said he did.
Yeah, he kind of sort of did. We give him a lot of credit. Anyway, so you consider yourself, and your dad's a deep thinker. You're an advocate. You're not ashamed to kind of say what you believe. And I guess that quality or attribute led you into politics?
I think that addiction led me into politics.
Okay.
That addiction of I want the adrenaline of affecting the world around me.
Because I don't know how much of this you remember. I mean, I remember it very vividly. In 2004, some hayseed from the country ran against Tom Smith for a county council seat.
Yes, I do.
And some highfalutin John Locke endorsed lawyer ran against Hugh Leatherman for the Senate seat.
I remember it like it was yesterday, brother.
That's where you and I became friendly. Yeah. I mean, I knew of you. I think you knew of me. Yeah. But I could give your speech.
I knew Laverne.
Yeah, there you go. But
you can get my speech and I give your speech. I guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. We did it in so many churches and wherever people would listen because we were the underdogs.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, we were kind of the ragtag upstarts.
In a way, we were kind of running the same race.
Yeah, well, in a weird way. The state was turning red. Yeah. And I had the advantage of, that trend line kind of helping me and hurting you.
Endorsed both of our opponents.
They did. And it helped me. It probably didn't help you so much. That's that unfriendly relationship the media has with my party. But I want to go back to 04.
Yeah.
You decided, I'm running against Tom Smith for a county council seat. You're running against Hugh Leatherman.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, what about 2004 and Hugh Leatherman led you down the road of deciding that this is something I want to do?
Well, I think one, I was addicted to that desire to affect the world around me. Okay. And I don't necessarily make it a high purpose type of thing. You
want to be in the middle of it.
The feeling I got from being able to change things around me, or at least the perception that I had changed things around me. The feeling that I got in the courtroom. And two, why Leatherman? Well, listen, the way I was raised, you kind of pick the biggest guy on the playground and punch him in the nose. You may get the tar beat out of you, but everybody's going to remember.
If you're going to try to climb a mountain, climb Mount Everest.
Better, yeah. And I got the tar punched out of me, But in a strange way, it really helped build what became a very close relationship between he and I.
I want to go there. So you lose to Leatherman in 2004.
I get trounced.
And most thought you would.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us
and it was a
understood.
Republican district.
Sure. And I mean, he had a lot of yank, a lot of horsepower, a lot of endorsements, a lot of money.
He spent $700,000 in the last 2 weeks. That was $1 million. That was the most expensive Senate race at the time. Is $1 million spent in that race.
But you had the bug.
Yeah.
I mean, despite not being successful in 2004 against the late Hugh Leatherman, the bug bit you.
Yes.
I mean, you wanted to be in politics in a bad way, not in a self-serving way. I don't believe that for a second. I've never felt this was about you.
Oh, but it cost me money. But yeah. No, I mean, but again, it was because I had this, and I guess the feeling you get from changing things around you, and the idea that something in your brain can affect the world around you.
It's a powerful force. I mean,
By the way, the other guy won.
Yeah, but yeah. So let's go down this road, and I've got some other things to discuss.
Yeah.
So Leatherman beats you in 2004.
Yes.
Over the next 12 to 15 years, you guys built a very special and endearing friendship.
When Hugh Leatherman passed, I counted him as one of my most close personal friends.
What led to that?
Fred Carter. I mean, no question about it. So I lose in 2004, and in 2008 I run for mayor. And
we'll get to that.
Talk about that. But after I won the mayor's race, which was a contentious thing, Fred called me and said, "Come out to the university. I want you to have dinner with me and Chairman Leatherman." And I told my paralegal Jeannie, if I don't come back, I'm buried in a shallow grave out behind Francis Marion. And I went out there and sat down with the three of them, and Hugh Leatherman looked at me and said, "You and I are not going to fight. There's things that people in our community need, and we're going to see to it that they get what they need. And are you agreeable with that?" I said, "Yes, sir." And from then on, it wasn't immediate. It built over time, but we built trust and confidence in one another and relationship. Fred did that. At least he fostered that.
Do you agree with my theory that Fred Carter has an insight that most humans don't have to know when politicians that aren't on the best of terms need to be on better terms?
Look, you can't. We could spend this whole time and 3 more talking about Fred Carter and what he's meant to this community, what he's meant behind the scenes, his ability to see from 10,000 feet who needs to be put together, particularly when it doesn't make sense to anybody else. And I'm sure it wouldn't have made sense to anybody. What would Fred have gained by putting me and Leatherman in a room together, knowing that it could go very badly?
I'll tell you what Fred knew. Fred knew that we hadn't seen the last of Stephen Wukela.
Well, maybe.
Fred, I mean, you know as well as I do, one of the smartest men that I've ever crossed paths with. Oh, yeah. And one of the most politically instinctive, and kind of a personality he has. So let's go to 2008. I mean, I'm on county council, and I can't make heads or tails of what's going on in the mayor's race. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm over here fighting Rusty and some of these other good old boys about what needs to be done in the county, and there's this damn mayor's race that was decided by a single vote that ends up going to the South Carolina Supreme Court.
Yes.
The story is what, Stephen? I mean, you decide when to run for mayor, and kind of walk us through that process.
Well, I mean, it's a long story. I mean, the fact that I had lost to Leatherman didn't change anything as far as my desire to affect the world and be involved in politics. I was. It was not an easy decision for Laura and I, my wife Laura and I, to come back to Florence. I had finished law school. I went to law school, and after college, I asked Laura to marry me. We got married and went to law. I went to law school in D.C. and I clerked for a judge up there, and I worked for the Department of Labor. And most of my law school classmates went to working for big D.C. firms or New York firms.
There was a good career waiting on Stephen Wukela somewhere.
I could have stayed there at the judge's office, or there was a lot of people working on the Hill and stuff. And going back home, I had family at home, and I knew I wanted to be in the courtroom. But Florence, to be candid, had a lot of factors that didn't really compete with the other places that Laura and I might go to. I mean, downtown was a shambles. There weren't a lot of the amenities, cultural amenities that we'd come to expect.
Did you blame anybody, Stephen? I mean, being a natural advocate.
Oh yeah, I mean, I absolutely blamed. I knew that the economic forces. I think the year my family moved to Florence, I-20 was connected to Florence, and of course, at that point, downtown was doomed because the mall was going to occur. That was occurring everywhere. So there were economic forces that play that maybe nobody could do anything about. But I felt that the leadership in this community had let that occur.
Neglect.
I mean, listen, there were very few ways. It's almost impossible to have walked through downtown Florence in 2000 and not use the word neglect. I mean, it was neglected and embarrassing. And
so why did you run towards that and not away from it?
Well, I guess kind of the same reason I ran against you, Leatherman. The idea of you go after the biggest problem.
So when you decide to run for mayor in 2008, a lot of your motivation is downtown?
Yes. Well, twofold. Downtown and the neighborhoods that surrounded downtown. Because you want to talk about neglect. If you went north of downtown into North Florence, Northwest Florence, East Florence, what you saw was abandoned houses. What you saw was roads that flooded and that were crumbling. North of the courthouse, there had been 50% of the population lived north of the courthouse, and there had been no investment. And it was 99% black. And those two, and I saw downtown as the dividing line between that north, south, and south side, and it bothered me.
Okay, you've got this frustration, you've got these ideas, you run against former Mayor Frank Willis, you win the original count by single vote?
Yeah. So, but let me tell you a little bit.
Okay.
So
this is your podcast, not mine.
That race. So Frank was a Democrat. Okay. The Democratic primary was 70% black. It was all Democrat. The city of Florence was 45% black. And so I ran to the left of Frank Willis. I was already to the left of Frank Willis.
You were.
And Frank didn't work, certainly in the black community and the churches and the leadership in the black community. And Leatherman saw it coming. And Leatherman, the city of Florence had realigned its election process from off years, because municipal elections do not have to occur when everybody else's elections occur, but had realigned it from off years to coincide with the general election cycle. Okay, and when that happened, I saw that there was opportunity. The turnout was going to be a lot bigger. I didn't anticipate it, but Barack Obama was on the ballot, and I had been a supporter of Obama and helped organize that campaign. There were a lot of people involved in the political process, particularly on the Democratic side, that had never been involved before, and were good people. And so I kind of built an organization to that process. Leatherman saw it coming, and Leatherman convinced the election commission to hold two elections, a municipal election and an election for everybody else, on the theory that you could go, Lindsey Graham had opposition, so you could go vote in the Republican primary for Lindsey Graham and then turn around and go vote in the Democratic primary for mayor and vote for Frank Willis. Well, the state law says you can't vote in more than one party's primary on the same day. But the Election Commission broke it into 2 elections and was allowing that to occur. And as a result, a lot of Republicans went and voted in the Republican primary and then went and voted in the Democrat primary for Frank, which I think I won the black vote by 60, 70%. But because so many Republicans came into the race and voted for Frank, it narrowed it down to 1 vote. And then Frank appealed it all the way up to the So
Supreme you're a lawyer. The appeal process was what? What did they predicate their argument upon?
Well, interestingly enough, at some of the polling places, they were poll managers that had been running the poll for 30, 40 years. And they knew the law was you couldn't vote more than one party's primary on the same day. And so a Republican would vote for Lindsey Graham and then go to the poll manager and go, I didn't see the mayor's race. And they said, no, that's in the Democratic primary. And they'd say, well, I want to vote in that. And they'd say, you can't vote in both. And so the argument that the Willis-Camp Marguerite made, was those people were deprived their vote. And our response was, that's illegal to begin with. You can't vote in more than one party's primary on the same day. And so, so Frank filed a protest. My father and I talked about it, and he said, well, both of us had done a good bit of election law, and he said, I think you're a fool if you represent yourself. And I said, I agree. And he said, well, I'm willing to do it, but on one condition. I'm willing to
do it. I'm busting at the gut to do it.
But on the condition that you can't talk.
Okay.
Which was enormously difficult for me. And so.
But you trusted him.
But I trusted him. And so, but we're also both type A personalities. I think that's probably the only time we've ever been in a courtroom together. And we both wanted to be in charge. And it was hard to sit there and not argue myself, but it's my father. And so, the Mike Nettles heard the circuit court appeal and affirmed the result. The Democratic Party had the first hearing and they affirmed the result, and then Frank appealed to the Supreme Court and they dismissed
From the
appeal.
time that you thought you won the election, the night of, the morning after, until you were certified officially the winner, how long a period of time is that?
From June the 10th to August. Well, no. All right, so June the 10th is the night of the primary. August the 8th, the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal. But in the meantime, Leatherman also, and I don't think he'd mind in retrospect,
It's politics.
It's politics. He realized that I was going to win the appeal. And so he went to Frank and said, you're going to lose. We need another candidate. Of course, no Republican had filed. And so Frank said, I'm going to win. Of course, I wasn't in the room, but I know this. I believe this is what occurred. And Leatherman says, no, you're not. We're going to recruit another candidate. And they went and recruited my good friend. And Frank was my friend. I mean, I got along very well with Frank. Rocky Pierce, who had been a former mayor. And they recruited Rocky to run as an independent, a petition candidate.
Stephen, because I'm in the middle. I mean, I get reelected to council in 2008. Were they afraid that this radical young liberal was going to turn Florence into...
I think my father's reputation did not help.
Into San Francisco. Well, I mean, you're fine. But once again, and I want to say this on the record, your father and I agree on very little about American politics.
I think you'd be surprised how much you do agree.
But he has a passion, and has always had a passion that I genuinely respect and to some degree admire, that he's willing to speak his piece and let the chips fall where they may. So you get elected, the Supreme Court affirms or confirms that you are indeed...
Dismiss the appeal.
Okay, dismiss the appeal. You're declared the winner. Time to get to work now.
Yes. Now I have to run in a general election.
Well, I mean, but you know who I'm talking about here. The power brokers believe, oh, my God... I mean, we've got a pretty predictable county council. Yeah. We've got a chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Yeah. We've got other members of the delegation. But we've got this wild card, guys. I mean, we've got this young son of a liberal radical interloper, that comes down here. How did you create a degree of comfort with the Eddie Floyd and the Fred Carters of the world, the Hugh Leathermans of the world for that? Well, I mean, me and Rusty. Well, I mean, I don't know how many conversations Rusty and I had about, you can't tell him a damn thing. Now he wants to rebuild downtown. We're good old boys, Pamplico and Lake City. You can't tell him a damn thing. Now he's really serious about trying to rebuild downtown. Yeah. But how do you think you were able to build that level of trust with people who fundamentally disagree with most of your politics?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that. One is, that Southern relationship business. I mean, yeah, I was a city guy who's real interested in downtown, but I grew up a stone's throw from Malloy McCann out in Clawson.
Well, you grew up with your mom's influence. You talked previously to that.
Yeah, and so I knew a lot of these people, and so there was that degree of relationship. I mean, you and I had built a relationship.
Sure.
So that helped a lot. And two, again, we're back to Fred Carter. I mean, it wasn't only Hugh Leatherman that Fred said come out here and talk to at the university. It was Eddie Floyd. It was go down the list. And on each occasion, to their credit, I mean, I can remember sitting down to talk to Eddie Floyd the first time about that stuff after the election, and he said, "You aren't going to believe this, but I'm interested in building a medical school, and everybody's going to tell me I'm crazy, but that's what I want to accomplish. What do you think about that?" And my response was, "I think that's great. Where you want to put it?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. Where should we put it?" And I said, "I want to put it downtown." And he said, "I think we can work together." And here we sit.
Okay. We've done a podcast with Tim Norwood, Gray Rains. They were very instrumental. Stephen, I always felt, as a business guy, that the only way downtown could sustain itself was when private investment felt there was an ability to make a return on that investment.
Yes.
The government, I mean, I was part of the library. I was part of the museum. I'm part of you guys in Francis Marion Performing Arts Center and all these other amenities and quality of life components. But I still felt that the businessman or woman had to feel there was an opportunity to go down there and be successful. And eventually we got there. When were you kind of sort of confident that people would genuinely make private sector investment in downtown?
Did
you feel like that? Did you realize that the government can only carry it so far? Eventually we've got to find private investment.
No, absolutely. I felt, and I still feel, that it was a broken market. Okay, I looked at downtown, and I look at downtown in very much economic terms. Okay, and what was happening was the free market was broken. The market was not functioning downtown. Okay, investment wasn't possible. Banks were not going to loan into downtown. The market wasn't functioning. And so what had to occur, in my view, was that government had to come in and mitigate risk and create an environment where the market could function. Okay? And that meant the government getting in and getting its hands dirty. And that meant the government, first of all, building cultural amenities along with nonprofits that couldn't be expected to make money. Performing Arts Center, museum, library, okay, to draw people downtown. But the problem was they would come and then they would leave, right? The next step was government creating a mitigation of the risk for the marketplace so that investors who were aggressive and who were willing to take a significant risk could palatably take that risk. Of course, those investors were people like you and Gray and Tim, and Chris Scott, and Frank Chisholm and Jimmy Brown, who said, "All right, we can't do this all by ourselves. You have to mitigate that risk, but we're willing to take the risk." And I can remember, and I know Tim has told the story, sitting around the table in my office with Tim Norwood and Chris Scott and Gray Rains and those guys saying, "We think we can build a hotel and a restaurant. And if we fill it, the cost of renovating this building is X, and the revenue that we can hope to generate to serve the debt service is Y, and there's this gap." And I can't remember what it was. It was like $1 million or something. "We need you to fill the gap." And the city struggled with that, really struggled with that. And finally, what really occurred was another person that we've not talked to, but that played one of the biggest roles in this whole thing, was the utility director at the time, public works director, who then became city manager, Drew Griffin, who said to me, "Listen, if the utility was going to expand lines out to the edge of the county because someone was building a hotel out there, we would calculate the cost of that water and sewer expansion. We calculate the revenue that we could expect to get from that expansion. And if those two numbers came to even over a 20-year, 25-year period, then we would do it. Well, why wouldn't we do that downtown? Right? The same calculus, the same financial calculus makes sense. And if Raines is going to build a hotel that's going to generate X number of dollars in water and sewer and X number of dollars in property tax, and we can amortize that over 30 years, and the utility can justify that, then why wouldn't we loan them $1 million or do a conditional grant for $1 million, expecting to be paid back on property tax and water and sewer revenue that you could calculate to a pretty clear certainty?
Is that something the public misunderstands?
Absolutely.
They think you folks, I mean, I've been in multiple meetings with you and Drew and city staff. They believe that, and I'm talking about my crowd, the conservatives, that they believe that the government gave these investors money.
Absolutely not.
No, every meeting we ever had with you or city staff, it was a kind of a balance of, okay, here's the investment we think we can afford. What sort of return do you think you can not pay the city back by? I'm talking about, we didn't go to the bank, borrow money. We did that, but at the city we didn't. But you guys were always considering these grants as investments. What is the return on that investment?
And Ken, you had to be able to calculate it to a pretty clear certainty. I mean, that's one of the ways, when you talk about building relationships, that's one of the ways I and the Mayor Pro Tem, Buddy Brand, who is a very conservative financial guy, also built a very close relationship because we both spoke the same language in numbers. And we both said, look, if they spend $7 million on a hotel, the property tax bill is going to go from $500 to $100,000, right? And we know that's going to occur. Whether they ever fill it or not, that's going to occur. We can calculate that return over 25 years, over whatever period, really. I mean, Joe Riley used to say, City of Charleston's going to be here for forever. We can amortize it over for forever, right? But even in the marketplace, you would say 20 to 25 years for construction of real property. We can see that number, okay? And even if we say, the tax assessor's not going to assess it at $7 million, they're going to assess it at $5 million. Okay, be conservative and see that number. Water and sewer revenue. We know how much water and sewer a hotel is going to generate. We provide water and sewer for hotels all the time. We can calculate that number very carefully. You're not talking about these hazy numbers of, well, what would the spinoff, value be? No. These were hard, easily calculable numbers. And then to be able to say, okay, we can see what this return will be to the taxpayer over this period of time. It's justified for the utility to advance that number, and then you reimburse us with those revenues over that period of time, revenues which wouldn't have been there if we hadn't done it.
Stephen, you mentioned Joe Riley a second ago, and you could easily argue the most effective politician since Strom Thurmond in South Carolina. Love Strom, hate Strom, but he was an effective politician. Joe Riley, unbelievably effective in leading Charleston into this renaissance. How often did you consider the Knox Whites of the world, the Joe Rileys of the world? How much advice were they willing to share with you on the mistakes they made, what they got right as they built these unbelievable downtowns in Charleston and Greenville?
They were both enormously generous and helpful and taught to me all the time. Although I'll tell you that Knox White's the mayor of Greenville, still the mayor of Greenville.
He is.
Knox experience was a little bit more applicable to what we were doing than Riley's. Riley had a different political environment. Knox is in Greenville. I mean, it's a conservative place.
Riley had the ocean.
Riley had the ocean, right? Knox has a partisan council manager, form of government, whereas Riley, was king, and Greenville's experience was closer. I remember being at Clemson, and there was nothing in Greenville, South Carolina. Certainly not downtown. Now, of course, Greenville had a much bigger industrial base to draw from, but and Knox would. I remember having a conversation with Knox early on when he said, "Listen, the first thing you got to build is hotels. The first thing you got to build is as libraries and performing arts centers and museums. The next thing you build is hotels. And that's what happened, of course.
So Greenville was somewhat of a blueprint.
Absolutely a blueprint. And that's what happened there. I mean, they built the Peace Center, they built the Hyatt, and then the next thing you get is apartments, which is what we saw as well. And once you get residential downtown, then retail comes. And we're still in that, in my view, in that period where you're building residential downtown that can then support really serious retail downtown.
Obviously you're doing other things, but it's apparent that downtown was where you felt the city needed to make its most committed investments. I mean, you can't forget what's happening here and there and some other places. The folks in 5 Points, the Florence Mall, some of the lower income. I mean, they all have to be considered when you're the mayor. But you really believed and still believe, and it's been proven now to be true. You really believe that a vibrant city center was essential to moving a community forward.
Well, remember, and you remember this very well from county council. Not long after I came on as mayor, we lost a big industry because
Starbucks.
of downtown. Lost them to Augusta.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I did. Yeah,
well, it
did.
was. I mean, that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that changed a lot of minds about the importance of what downtown meant to economic redevelopment. And listen, as you say, the mall obviously was important. The 5 Points area was important, but those markets functioned. Downtown's market was broken. And so the city had to redo that. And I would add, those neighborhoods around downtown were part of that too. And the blueprint that worked downtown, that economic blueprint, was the same blueprint that has worked and is kind of quietly working still in the neighborhoods around downtown.
Do you miss being a part of it in an official capacity? But I know people talk to you about it, and I talk to you a lot about it. We bumped into one another a couple of weeks back in town hall. Do you miss being at the table when some of these important decisions are being made?
I miss being at the table with Fred Carter and Hugh Leatherman and Eddie Floyd and Drew Griffin and Buddy Brand. I mean, being in those rooms with those people, Gray Reigns, who became such good friends, and where you could walk out of one of those rooms and say, okay, we're building a health sciences facility. It's going to be X number of tens of millions of dollars, and it's going to happen.
Stephen, in today's world, and I guess I traffic in the business of division. I mean, it's pretty lucrative, to be honest with you, in today's political market. I mean, it is what it is. I'm sorry, it is. We were able to largely join forces between what we knew was a left-of-center mayor and what you knew was majority right-of-center business guys. I don't remember ever having harsh or disagreeable words. I mean, we had to prove things, and you guys had, the public to explain to, but it was not conservative liberal. It was not, big government, small government. It was, hey, how can we make this work? And I guess that's what I am most proud to have been a part of.
It's practical. I mean, these guys in Washington and these days in Columbia, they yell at each other. They really don't do much of anything, and they really don't have to account for the fact that they don't do anything. They spend their time tweeting out this or that, or talking to the press.
All the races are won in primaries.
All the races are won in primaries. At home, you either built the health sciences facility or you didn't, and people knew whether you had built it or whether you didn't. And if you built something and it failed, people knew it. So they knew it in the grocery store when you went to the grocery store.
So let's go down this road. I mean, obviously, very proud and instrumental, and I think you don't like this, but we should name something after Stephen Wukela. You've been that impactful to downtown, and I know. I mean, you're talking about some of these meetings. I didn't read about it and hear about them. I'm in the room with you guys when we're trying to hash out some of these issues and address some of these concerns. But
I don't like that part about politics.
Well, I mean, I don't either. I mean, and local politics affords you the opportunity to be less partisan. Yeah. I mean, I get it when you go to Washington, you get your scorecard, and you got the scorecard, and did I make the ACLU mad or did I make the Heritage Foundation mad? You don't have much tolerance for that. I guess I don't either. But I understand when you get to Washington It is very partisan. It's very divisive, and those guys are trying to get, and ladies are trying to get reelected. I want to get you to do this if you don't mind. Do you miss it, and why did you decide now is the time to not run for reelection?
Well, I'm still an addict, right? I mean, in our euphemism for it, I still like the feeling of achieving things and seeing things change because of some idea that me or my friends came up with. I miss you, Leatherman. I miss seeing Fred Carter every day. I miss seeing Drew Griffin every day. And I miss doing things with them and you and Gray and the others and seeing the result. I do not miss politics. I am a very private person. I don't like going to if I go to a cocktail party, if I have my choice, I stand in the corner. I'm not a social person. I'm not our mutual friend Patrick McLaughlin is gregarious. He'll go into a room,
loves it.
He loves it, and people gravitate to him. He loves people. People love him. His daddy was that way, and I'm not that. I do not. I just assume being alone in my room reading my books with my family. So I didn't like that about politics. I didn't like the ribbon cutting or the let's name this after. I didn't like that about politics, and I do not miss that about politics. And as you know, it is a grind. It is bad for you. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your family.
It's bad for your checkbook. Normally,
it's horrible for your checkbook. And so I've enjoyed being a private individual. And I got as to when I got out. I got out just in time to spend some real time with my family and with my boys before they went off to school.
And they're how old?
I have a 20-year-old who's my oldest, who's in China in school. And so I left 4 years ago, right? And so I was there for those last 2 years as he was making those really important decisions and kind of leaving. And my middle son, who's at University of South Carolina, I was home. And my third son, who's getting ready to leave, he's going to Japan in August. And so I got to be home with my family and with them, and so it was the right time to leave.
What do you make of the state of politics in Washington?
It's despicable.
Expound upon that. Why is it despicable?
I don't mind arguments. I mean, I've just told you that I think my dad argues for calisthenics. But
I argue for a living.
Yeah, I argue for a living. But it's not it's not argument to go anywhere. It's not productive. It's not practical. They're aren't arguing to achieve anything. They're arguing to excite a base so they can get elected and go back there and continue doing the same thing. And that seems to me to
is
be
it
torture.
Broken?
Absolutely.
Okay,
broken.
Stephen, let me be very pessimistic. You ready? If it's broken, we're a nation in decline.
No, I don't know. Listen, I think it was broken in 1780. I mean, you go back and look at the election when Jefferson was elected the first time, and the equivalent of Twitter in the
it's pretty wild
in the press that they had there, and the attacks they were making on one another, and I mean I think Jefferson, he wrote as much that the political discourse was broken in America at the time. That's the beauty of this country, though, right? That's the beauty of the Constitution, that it's a durable enough and flexible enough document that this country can break and fix and reinvent itself and break again and reinvent itself and fix itself. I was talking to Fred the other day. My middle son is a history major at USC, and he was interviewing his grandfather, my father, for a class, oral history of 1968. Well, my father was at Ohio State in 1968. The Leatherman bombed the ROTC building. Martin Luther King was killed. Bobby Kennedy was killed. He was getting ready to go to the Army. The Tet Offensive was occurring, and he interviewed him about that. And I was talking to Fred about it, who was a Marine officer, And I said, do you think that, I didn't live through that. So do you think we were more divided in 68 than we are now? And he said, absolutely. This country has been through, I mean, we've had elections during the Civil War. You know, it's been through that before. So I wouldn't say that we're a country in decline. This has always been the experiment.
This is complicated.
It's complicated. It's messy. What did they say? Politics ain't beanbags.
Yeah. So let's this could get a good, we could have a good conversation. I'm arguing on the radio and on this podcast that the two most consequential figures in modern American political history, and I'm talking about post-Rogan.
Yeah.
I mean, Clinton was I hate to say it, guys, Clinton was a good president. I mean, I think Gingrich and Clinton, two smart guys, they may have introduced a degree of nastiness into modern politics, and Newt's probably largely responsible for that. I'm not brown-nosing my Democrat friend here, but it's true.
I could tell you a list of things I disagreed with Bill Clinton about.
But here's my point. Neither one of those guys were dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say Newt was this, Bill was that. Neither one of those guys were dumb.
No.
Very bright, intelligent men. But Stephen, my argument today is the two most powerful political forces in America aren't holding office: Barack Obama and Donald Trump. I mean, they're still enormously influential in their certain ways. What did you make of the Obama? I mean, you wanted Obama to be elected. You worked on behalf of Barack Obama. You don't apologize here.
Yeah.
You know that. I mean, you and I have discussed this 100. Stephen told me one day, 10, 12, 15 years ago, that he said, "Hey man, I'm too far left of center." I said, "Stop! Don't say that. You've got a bright future, and we're in a red state, turning redder and redder and redder by the day. Hold on to that. Let's discuss later." But no, I mean, and Stephen, what I'm arguing is, it's not as much philosophy as it is personality. Obama is a larger-than-life personality. Trump is a larger-than-life personality. Half the country don't like Obama. Half the country don't like Trump. What do you make of that?
I'd say a couple things. One, I'd say that obviously personality is enormously important. I don't say that like cult of personality, but I say that, listen, somebody was talking the other day about what are we going to do when Fred Carter leaves Francis Marion University? Who will be the successor to Fred Carter at Francis Marion University? And my response was, what does it matter? Who was the president of Francis Marion University didn't matter much before Fred Carter was there, and it may well not matter much after he leaves there. It matters because Fred Carter is the president of Francis Marion University. And I say that because he's my dear and beloved friend. But as we've talked about, things happen because Fred Carter caused them to happen or enabled them to happen far beyond the great effect at the university. His personality in that role mattered and matters way more than the role itself.
Transformational.
It's transformational. And you can say that about all kinds of seats. I think people get tied up in who is the president or who is the senator or who is the president of the university. And the seat, I don't think matters. I think, Lyndon Johnson famously said, power is where power goes. And he famously made things powerful. The United States Senate Majority Leader position did not mean anything until it was held by Lyndon Johnson. And so I think personality matters in the sense that it can make things matter that don't matter and can change things. But I would also say that there is this danger of this cult of personality and this idea that people line up behind Clemson or Carolina just because it's Clemson or Carolina, and swear allegiance to this membership in this tribe or club in this kind of mindless and dangerous sometimes way.
Do you and I'm going to give myself more credit than I deserve, I guess, but you and I would be fairly informed on the political matters of today.
I'm less informed than I used to be.
Well, I mean, I'm probably more informed than I was before because of the job I do. Don't we, you and I, have a responsibility to the process, to the machine, to the whether it's Trump world or Obama world or whoever comes next. I mean, don't you and I, because we've dedicated a certain degree of our intellect and abilities and understanding to politics, don't we have an obligation to try and make it better?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. Both my parents, both my father and my grandfather served in the military. My family believes in public service and the responsibility you have to do something. Set aside the addiction to the feeling you get when you make something change. I had the ability, and you had the ability, because of work done by people ahead of us, to commit time and effort to public service that our parents couldn't. And so absolutely we had an obligation to do that. I will say though that it is costly. It's costly on your family, it's costly on your pocketbook, it's costly on your life. You know it as well as I do. And I think people in the public do not realize when done correctly how hard and how taxing public service is.
Yeah, if you want to half-ass it, but you're not the kind of half-ass it, nor am I. What do you want to do from here to the finish line, Stephen? I mean, what is, you don't know whether it's today or 100 years from now, but what do you want to spend your time doing?
I mean, I'm happy practicing law and raising a family and watching. I mean, I take enormous amount of pleasure in watching my boys' success and seeing them become what they want to become. And I know I get to feel the pleasure that my dad had sitting around that dinner table, kind of jousting with these young minds and enjoying watching what they do with their lives. I get a lot of pleasure in that. I'm not ready to go out to pasture, and I'm still an addict, I guess, if you will.
You still running?
You physically run? Yeah. I run just about every day.
How much? How far?
Well, I'll probably run 20, 25 miles a week. So I run maybe 3 or 5 miles a day and a little bit longer on the weekends. But that's one of those things you don't get to do if you're in public office, because you all your time is consumed. I go home and I get to cook on the weekends and spend time with my wife and garden and all that sounds boring, I'm sure, but
I can relate.
Those are all the things you miss if
I drink one too many beer. Not that big a deal.
That's not that big of a deal, and you you get to say what you think a little bit more without running the consequence of having to be responsible to a bigger organization. When
and I'll close with this. When my world blew up politically and I was forced to resign, the state newspaper, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been the Post and Courier, one or the other, reached out to you for a comment, and Robert Cahaley called me in a panic. And Robert was my consultant. He's gone on to be a kind of a polling guru at Trafalgar. Yeah. Robert's a good friend of mine, and Robert's a smart guy. You know that. Very, very bright about politics. But Robert called me and in a panic said, "Hey, man, the newspaper's calling your liberal mayor. What are we going to do to respond?" I mean, he's going. You know what he's going to do? He's going to take a shot at a Republican, because that's what Democrats and Republicans did, and you didn't do it.
Well, you're a friend of mine.
Well, and that cuts to the chase. I mean, that if folks could understand that politics is mostly about people. I mean, there's no doubt policy and persuasion and advocating for your opinion, but politics, if we could get back to the art of caring about other human beings that feel differently than we do about whatever the hell we'll argue about, we'd get to so much better a place.
And there's a pretty good dose of hypocrisy that goes with a lot of those comments, isn't there? I mean, set aside the fact that we're friends. The newspaper calls me and I act like I've never made a mistake in my life, and I can't believe that Ken Ard would make a mistake. And that's pretty damn hypocritical, isn't it? I mean, look, let's all be candid. We're all humans.
Sure.
We all make mistakes, and if you're so damn full of yourself that you can't admit that you make mistakes and you want to run down your friend because they made a mistake, I don't know what to say about you.
Well, and I guess the biggest compliment I can give you is I told Robert, "Don't worry. You don't have anything to worry about. Stephen will be very gracious, very fair about whatever it is he says. And in a world where Democrats are supposed to hate Republicans and Republicans are supposed to hate Democrats, I consider you a dear friend.
Well,
and I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
And I'm proud to be your friend, Ken, and I'm proud that I hope you consider you my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, my man.
Thank you.